North Vietnam, June 20th, 1965. An F-4C Phantom burns in the jungle below. Two MiG-17s circle like sharks, waiting for the next American jets to scream in at Mach. Then something no one expects in 1965. A deep, thunderous prop roar rolls across the valley. Four straight-winged beasts punch through the clouds. A-1 Skyraiders slow heavy, painted bright and wide. To the MiG pilots, they look like sitting ducks. But these ducks carry teeth. And what happens next will prove one truth. Sometimes the old warhorse can still kill the jet. America's prop monster, no jet could kill. 1944. The U.S. Navy was desperate. Their Helldivers and Avengers were outdated, overweight, and complicated. They needed something new, an attack aircraft that could haul a bomber's load, endure brutal carrier landings, and fly for hours over an ocean battlefield. Ed Heinemann's solution was brutally simple. Build it big. Build it tough. Strap the right R-3350 18 cylinders, 2,700 horsepower to a straight wing designed for low-altitude stability. Forget speed, think payload range and survivability. Prototype XBT-2D1. First flight, March 18, 1945, el segundo CA. Test pilot, Laverne Ward Brown. Production order A-1 Skyraider. Redesignated A-1 in 1962. The first flight was smooth, predictable, uneventful, a victory in itself. In a time when prototypes often crashed on their maiden flights, the XBT-2D1 showed promise from day one. My original opinion of the plane did a complete 180, Captain William C. Smith, USMC. This was no ordinary piston aircraft. 4 20mm cannons in its wings, 15 hardpoints beneath them, maximum ordnance, 8,000 pounds bombs, rockets, torpedoes, gun pods, napalm, even flares. With drop tanks, it could stay airborne for nearly 10 hours. Folding wings saved space on crowded carrier decks. Its landing gear was built like a sledgehammer, soaking up brutal traps on pitching carriers. Hydraulic controls gave pilots fine precision in tight turns and steep dives. Speed 350 mph, slower than jets. Loiter time 8 to 10 hours, far longer than jets. Payload equal to medium bombers. In an age obsessed with jets and supersonic speed, the Skyraider was a throwback. But it was built to endure, to loiter, and to deliver devastation where jets could not. On July 3rd, 1950, just days after the Korean War erupted, Skyraiders took off for their first combat missions. They struck bridges, convoys, and supply depots, becoming the workhorses of close air support. Where jets ran low on fuel, SPADs kept circling. On May 1st, 1951, they proved their versatility. Squadron VA-195 from USS Princeton, nicknamed the Dambusters, dropped aerial torpedoes into the Hwacheon Dam under heavy fire. It was insane, impossible. Yet the gates blew open. The reservoir drained. The mission became legend. And sometimes the hunter became the hunted. On June 16, 1953, Major George Linnemeyer and Warrant Officer Vernon Kramer spotted a North Korean PO-2 biplane, Bedcheck Charlie, a wooden ghost of World War I. With one burst, the Skyraiders' cannons shredded it. The SPAD had scored its only air-to-air victory in Korea. By the end of the Korean War, 128, Skyraiders were lost most to flak, or the unforgiving physics of carrier landings. Heavy, slow, unforgiving at times, but never useless. The SPAD had carved its place in modern war. As jets defined the future, the A-1 looked like a relic, outdated, too slow, too heavy. But history had one more brutal war, waiting one where the Skyraider would prove not just relevant, but irreplaceable. When the jet age rose, the A-1 was expected to retire, until Vietnam called it back. In the early 1960s, Washington faced a paradox. The U.S. could not openly deploy its newest jets inside South Vietnam, too visible, too escalatory. But the war demanded air power. The answer came not in supersonic technology, but in an old piston brute, the A-1 Skyraider. Over 350 A-1s were handed to the fledgling South Vietnamese Air Force, and one of the first men to fly it was Nguyen Cao Ky, future Prime Minister, future Vice President. To him, the Skyraider was no relic. Never had I flown such a powerful aircraft. It leapt into the sky like a tiger, and it took every muscle in my body just to tame it. In the chaos of Saigon, Ku's A-1s made their presence felt. Loyalist SPADs crushed rebel positions. Yet only months later, rogue Skyraider pilots turned their cannons against the presidential palace itself. A machine built for war was now reshaping politics in South Vietnam. August 1964. After torpedo boat skirmishes in the Tonkin Gulf, America retaliated. Operation Pierce Arrow, the first official U.S. strikes against North Vietnam, and the Skyraider was at the tip of the spear. Among them was Lieutenant Junior Grade Richard C. Sather. On his third pass, flak tore through his Skyraider. Smoke filled the cockpit. The aircraft rolled inverted and vanished into the haze. He became the first U.S. Navy aviator killed in Vietnam. LTJG Richard C. Sather, USS Constellation. KIA, August 5, 1964. His sacrifice marked the beginning of a long and brutal air war, one that would test the Skyraider like no other. 7.62mm minigun, pod 6,000 rounds per minute. Cluster bombs, napalm canisters, he-rockets, white phosphorus rockets, parachute flares. 800 rounds of 20mm cannon ammo, external fuel tanks. By night, the Skyraider became a flying arsenal. Each sortie could rain cluster bombs, napalm rockets, phosphorus, and cannon fire while still carrying the fuel to loiter for hours. But the most shocking detail, there was no radar, no infrared sensors, no night vision. These men flew by moonlight, muzzle flashes, and instinct. They hunted convoys along the Ho Chi Minh Trail, cutting supply lines through Laos and Cambodia. For the crews below, it felt like the very jungle was on fire. The Skyraider's greatest role was born in desperation combat search and rescue. When a pilot went down, jets were too fast, too short-legged to stay overhead. But the A-1 could circle for hours, absorb punishment, and deliver covering fire. The call sign was Sandy, lead aircraft. Sandy Wiro 1 directed the rescue. His wingmen flew protective orbits, pounding gun positions with rockets and white phosphorus. For the man on the ground, the low, steady growl of the R-3350 meant one thing: hope was coming. This rescue business is the best, most rewarding operation in the entire war. Captain John Flynn, USAF call sign Sandy, coined by Captain J.W. Doc George, late 1965, Udorn. USAF 607 Fighter Squadron Commando flew A-1s from Udorn and Nakhon Phanom, often escorted HH-3, HH-53 Jolly Green Giant helicopters. The name Sandy stuck after 1965 and soon became synonymous with rescue itself. Units like the 602nd Fighter Squadron based in Thailand perfected the doctrine. If a pilot was down, the Sandys would fight through anything to get him out. Later models carried the Yankee extraction system, a rocket-powered seat that pulled pilots clear when the aircraft took fatal hits. Primitive compared to jet ejection seats, but it saved lives in the brutal skies over Vietnam. In a supersonic age, it was a piston monster from another era that proved indispensable. Not sleek, not fast, but always there. And in Vietnam, that was the difference between life and death. MiG kills and the last prop versus jet victories. June 20th, 1965. Northwest of Vietnam, a U.S. Phantom is down. 4 Skyraiders prop-driven dinosaurs arrive to cover the rescue. They're flying rescap. And then out of nowhere, 2 MiG-17s dive in to kill. The MiGs expect easy prey, but the Skyraider has one trick: it can turn tighter than any jet. June 20th, 1965. A prop plane killed a jet. An impossible sentence in the jet age, yet history had just been written. Prop downs, jet precedent erased. March 10th, 1966. The A Shau Valley. A forward base is collapsing under enemy assault. Major jump. Myers crash lands his Skyraider trapped, wounded, and surrounded. Rescue choppers are 30 minutes out. He has seconds. In the face of certain death, Fisher pulled off the impossible. For that act, he became the first U.S. Air Force pilot in Vietnam awarded the Medal of Honor. Medal of Honor, first U.S. Air Force award of the Vietnam War. This was the Skyraider at its purest, not just a war machine, but a lifeline. October 9th, 1966, Hanoi's skies. 4 SPADs from VA-176 encounter 4 MiG-17s. Outnumbered, outgunned, and outsped, this should have been a slaughter. Tom Patton had just done the unthinkable, downing a jet with a prop plane in the very heart of North Vietnam. October 9th, 1966. Last prop versus jet kill in history. It was the final chapter of an era. The last time a piston engine ever killed a jet in air-to-air combat. 3 missions, 3 legends. Against MiGs, against impossible odds, and against time itself, the Skyraider proved what mattered was not speed, but courage, firepower, and endurance. These were not just flights. They were statements carved into history. The last warrior of the prop age. By the late 1960s, turbine jets had fully arrived. The Navy's last Skyraider combat sortie came in February 1968 over Khe Sanh. The Air Force carried the SPAD a little longer, flying until late 1972, then turning the keys over to South Vietnam. And in Saigon, the Skyraider would fight to the very end, strafing columns, bombing bridges, even evacuating civilians, right up until April 1975. In Vietnam, the price was steep. 266 Skyraiders lost. 144 American pilots never came home. Most fell to ground fire, 5 to surface-to-air missiles, and 3 to aerial combat. A brutal toll, but one accepted by men who knew the mission was worth it. Royal Navy Skyraider AEWs launched from HMS Eagle during the 1956 Suez Crisis. Their radar systems were later transferred to the Avro Shackleton AEW-2, which remained in service well into the 1990s. French Air Force and Navy Skyraiders saw heavy action in Algeria, Chad, Djibouti, and Madagascar, loaded with bombs, rockets, and napalm, and in some cases even dropping glass bottles by hand to terrify enemy fighters. Sweden 14 surplus airframes were repurposed in the 1960s as target tugs for military training. The Skyraider's legend was not just American. The Royal Navy used it as an early warning platform during Suez. France unleashed it across Africa. Even Sweden, far from the jungles of Asia, flew it as a humble target tug. Everywhere it went, it did the job. Pilot Richard E. Drury once wrote, "We were flying anachronisms, piloting SPADs through a supersonic world, tasting the thunderstorms at 8,000 feet while an SR-71 screamed at Mach 3 above 70,000. It was a ludicrous situation, but one I applauded. Some of the greatest, most dangerous, and most heroic flying ever done was right there in old A-1 Skyraider's. In a supersonic world, the A-1 Skyraider proved that speed wasn't everything. Endurance, payload, ruggedness, and above all, the heart of the pilot. That was the formula that made a prop-driven monster the most reliable attack and rescue aircraft for 3 decades. The Skyraider, old, slow, and perfectly right.